John Wayne was once asked what he brought to American movies. He answered, vitality. And if vitality was measured in cash, Wayne had plenty. At least a dozen of his films pulled in over $100 million at the box office, adjusted for inflation, obviously. That's a stat even plenty of modern stars can't match. Here are the 10 biggest box office hits of his career. 2 decades before Airport, The Poseidon Adventure, and The Towering Inferno turned disaster movies into box office gold. The High and the Mighty laid the groundwork. John Wayne plays Dan Roman, a washed-up airline co-pilot who has to step up when a trans-Pacific flight loses an engine and the pilot completely unravels. The film wasn't supposed to be a John Wayne vehicle. Spencer Tracy was originally cast as Dan Roman, but when he bailed at the last minute, Wayne took over just to keep the project from going under, since he was financing it. And somehow, playing against his usual heroic persona, he gave one of the most unexpectedly moving performances of his career. William Wellman's direction turned what could have been a forgettable B-movie into a box office juggernaut, pulling in $10.4 million, over $116 million when adjusted for inflation. It scored 6 Oscar nominations and became the granddaddy of the disaster genre, influencing nearly every big-budget catastrophe movie that followed. John Wayne plays a German freighter captain trying to get his ship back to Germany at the start of World War II, dodging Allied warships along the way. Simple, straightforward war drama, but audiences ate it up. Wayne, though? He hated working with director John Farrow. He thought the guy botched the story and had no business being in charge. His exact words, "He proved to me that he should not be put in charge of a producer-director position. He failed to tell the good story that was in the book." Lana Turner didn't get along with Farrow either. She said he gave her no direction and treated the cast badly. Even with all that drama behind the scenes, the movie still made a fortune. Back in 1955, it pulled in $12 million at the box office. That's about $134 million today. Howard Hawks had a formula. Drop a bunch of tough guys into a dangerous job, throw in a woman to shake things up, and let the chaos unfold. Hatari swaps out cattle drives and mail planes for something even wilder, catching big game for zoos in East Africa. John Wayne leads the crew, wrangling everything from zebras to crocodiles, with no stunt doubles in sight. The actors did their own animal captures, and when a rhino actually escaped, Hawks kept it in the movie because it was too real to leave out. Even Wayne cursing while wrestling animals had to be dubbed over in post. The movie itself is pure adventure. Technicolor chases across the African plains, Wayne getting a bucket of goat's milk dumped on his head, and a childlike sense of fun that makes it impossible not to smile. Even Jean-Luc Godard called it the best film of 1962, better than Jules and Jim. Critics grumbled that Hatari felt like a lazy vacation for Hawks, and they weren't wrong. There was no finished script, and he basically filmed whatever he wanted, far away from studio interference. But Paramount wasn't complaining. It became their highest-grossing film of 1962, pulling in $12.9 million. That's about $135 million today. John Wayne's late-stage career in the 60s was nothing short of massive. Some of his highest-grossing films came from that decade. But if you'd asked him, he probably wouldn't have agreed. Production kicked off in January 1965, just months after Wayne had major cancer surgery. They removed his entire left lung and 2 ribs, but that didn't stop him. At 57, he insisted on doing his own stunts, determined to prove he wasn't slowing down. But even he admitted it wasn't easy. Talking to Roger Ebert, he said he could hear himself breathing on camera and thought it hurt his performance. "I don't care much for the film myself," he admitted. Wayne might not have been entirely happy with the movie, but the box office didn't lie. The Sons of Katie Elder pulled in $133 million adjusted, proving that no illness, no surgery, and no brutal filming conditions could slow John Wayne down. As Dean Martin put it, someone else would have laid around feeling sorry for himself for a year. But Duke, he just doesn't know how to be sick. By 1963, John Wayne needed a hit. The Alamo had drained his finances and hurt his box office reputation, so he went all in on something big, loud, and entertaining. Here, Wayne plays George Washington McLintock, a wealthy rancher who somehow ends up running everything. Ranchers, farmers, corrupt politicians, even the local drunks. But none of that gives him as much trouble as his wife, Kate. Maureen O'Hara plays her, and if you've seen these two together before, you know how this goes. Wayne and O'Hara had unreal chemistry. Wayne adored O'Hara, calling her his only real female friend, and their on-screen brawling turned into box office gold. McLintock ended up pulling in $14.5 million, about $155 million adjusted. George Stevens' The Greatest Story Ever Told had everything. Massive budget, all-star cast, sweeping biblical epic vibes, and still managed to bomb at the box office. It grossed $15.5 million, or $154 million adjusted, but even that wasn't enough to cover its ridiculous production costs. Classic case of Hollywood throwing too much money at a project and watching it sink. The cast list was stacked. Claude Rains, Charlton Heston, Martin Landau. Basically, if you were an actor in the 60s, you probably had a role in this movie. They even filled the smallest parts with big names. John Wayne and Sidney Poitier were among the most famous faces brought in for cameos. Wayne played a Roman centurion during the crucifixion scene, said exactly one line, and was gone. His whole involvement wasn't even about the movie. He owed United Artists a financial favor, and this was his way of settling the debt. As he put it, I felt like a fraud. But since United Artists were willing to pay me and then keep my salary to help pay off my debt to them, I thought, what the hell? The film ended up with 5 Oscar nominations, but not in any of the big categories. And since Wayne was barely in it, at least he didn't get any of the blame for the disaster. In his own words, I really was nothing more than an expensive extra. I only did 2 days' work. The Green Berets remains one of the most controversial films of Wayne's career, and considering his filmography, that's saying something. Wayne fought hard to get the Green Berets made, and when it finally hit theaters in 1968, it was the Vietnam War movie Hollywood didn't want. At a time when most of the country was turning against the war, Wayne, staunchly pro-military and anti-communist, delivered a film that fully embraced US involvement. Critics hated it. Roger Ebert ripped it apart, calling it cruel and dishonest and unworthy of the thousands who have died there. The New York Times went even further, calling it so unspeakable, so stupid, so rotten and false in every detail. But for Wayne, there was no moral gray area. He visited South Vietnam in 1966, met with American troops, and saw himself as their voice in Hollywood. While some called him a draft dodger for staying stateside during World War II, he spent the 60s as one of the most vocal celebrity supporters of the US military. This movie was his way of giving back. By the time True Grit came around, John Wayne had been playing cowboys for decades, but this one was different. Playing the grizzled, one-eyed U.S. Marshal Rooster Cogburn gave Wayne something he hadn't had in years, a real character to sink his teeth into, not just another John Wayne role. And he knew it. He even called it his first decent role in 20 years. The movie itself is a classic. Kim Darby plays Mattie Ross, this stubborn 14-year-old who hires Rooster to track down the man who killed her father. Glenn Campbell plays the Texas Ranger who joins them, and the three set off on a dangerous ride through Indian territory. Wayne loved working with director Henry Hathaway on this one, though he had some blunt thoughts about him. He once said, "Give Hathaway a good story, and he's great. He's not so good on his own stories, I found that out. But True Grit had the story, and Hathaway delivered." Even John Ford, who had been tough on him for years, shook his hand after the Oscar win and told him it was long overdue. That probably meant more to Wayne than the statue itself. They don't make movies like How the West Was Won anymore. This thing was massive. 5 chapters, 3 directors, and a cast packed with Hollywood legends. It follows 3 generations of the Prescott family from 1839 to 1889, covering the westward expansion, the Civil War, and the rise of the Wild West. The cast alone was insane. James Stewart, John Wayne, and Henry Fonda were all in it, the only time they ever appeared in the same movie. Spencer Tracy narrated, and the lineup was stacked with names like Debbie Reynolds, Lee Van Cleef, Gregory Peck, and Eli Wallach. Audiences couldn't get enough. It was the second highest grossing movie of 1963, right behind Cleopatra. But unlike Cleopatra, this one actually turned a profit. made $46.5 million at the box office, which adjusts to over $500 million today. It also cleaned up at the Oscars, winning Best Writing, Best Film Editing, and Best Sound, plus a Best Picture nomination. John Wayne built his career on westerns, but the biggest hit of his career is a war movie. The Longest Day made over $50 million at the time. Adjusted for inflation, that's more than $525 million. This is a full-scale World War II epic about the D-Day landings, and almost every character is based on a real person. Wayne plays Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Vandervoort, a guy who actually led troops into battle at Normandy. The cast is insane. Robert Mitchum, Richard Burton, Sean Connery, Henry Fonda, Rod Steiger. And the production didn't mess around when it came to accuracy. They brought in actual D-Day veterans as consultants, both Allied and German. The film was so massive, they needed 3 directors, 4 assistant directors, and 5 screenwriters just to keep it on track. Wayne's role is small, but memorable. He plays Vandervoort as this unshakable leader who marches into battle with a broken ankle, literally using his rifle as a crutch. The whole thing runs 3 hours, so it's a commitment. But if you're into war films, The Longest Day is a must-watch.